Hello, my favorite people in the whole entire world. How are you guys doing? I hope you're excited to finish up our Greece lesson. We're going to learn the last bit about ancient Greece history today, and then next time we'll learn more about the goddesses and gods, which is also my favorite part. I know all of Greece is my favorite. I keep saying that, but I really do. I love Greeks and goddesses and all that fun stuff. It's like my favorite stuff in the world. All right, so back to the lesson. Today we're on lesson 7. Alexander the Great. He was a king and he was a commander of many cities, and we're going to learn that about him in our lesson today. All right, so again, words to know. Our first word is Alexander. What word? Alexander. Okay, our next word is Alexandria. What is it? Alexandria. Then I have Macedonia and Gordian knot. Gordian knot's an interesting thing that I just have a hard time grasping. But we're going to learn about that today, and you'll understand why I'm kind of like, when it comes to the Gordian knot. All right. The philosophers, Aristotle, let's do a recap of our SPA. So SPA was 3 philosophers. They were in order. The first guy was Socrates. Great job. Socrates taught Plato, yes, Plato, and Plato taught who? Aristotle. Good job. And now Aristotle also had someone that he taught, and he taught Alexander the Great. He taught who, class? Get ready? Alexander the Great. Good job. So Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great, which still is SPA, S-P-A-A. It's just SPA, right? So it's still SPA. Alexander's mother taught him that when he grew up, he would do wonderful and mighty things. His father's name was Philip. Philip was the commander or the king of Macedonia. About where, class? Get ready? Yes, Macedonia. So he was the king of Macedonia. He was in charge of everything there. Now, in Macedonia, he was happy as the king of Macedonia. He had no issues with anything, and he liked being the king of that area. However, Alexander wanted to be more. Alexander wanted to have his own kingdom. He wanted to take over more. And Aristotle taught him how to be a good king and what it meant to be a good king and how he should rule and how to take care of his people. So Alexander felt like he really was the best candidate for the job, to be the king over everybody. Some people say that Alexander the Great was only Alexander the Great because he called himself Alexander the Great. That's like me going around and saying, Miss Johnson the best. I'm Miss Johnson the best. I'm Miss Johnson the best. I'm not asking if I'm the best. I'm just telling you I'm the best. So then sometimes that name just goes along with it. Okay, so Alexander the Great, no one necessarily thought he was the greatest. He thought he was the greatest. So he had everyone refer to him as Alexander the Great. Great job. Yep. I know. Great, right? So people say that Alexander the Great was not Alexander the Great only because he called himself that. King Philip, which is the father of Alexander the Great, ruled over most of Greece's cities and states, including Athens. But unfortunately, one day his dad died. Yes, he died of old age. Wasn't anything like a battle or whatnot. When he died, though, Alexander the Great became the new king, and he was only 22 years old. That's younger than me. That's a lot younger than me. So could you imagine someone younger than me being the king? Only probably like 10 or so. No, more like 12 years older than you are, probably. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so he was a pretty young guy, and he became the king. The city and state of Thebes, remember it's on our map, we've seen Thebes before, we've heard it. Thebes was like, no, I don't want you to be our king. We don't want you. You are too young, you're inexperienced, we don't want you to be our king. So Alexander the Great was like, really? You don't want me to be your king? All right, sounds good. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to burn your city down. Boom. And he did. He burned the entire city down, and he made all the people become his slaves. So not only did they lose their city, but they were forced to become slaves because they didn't want him to be the king. Remember I told you a while back that sometimes back in, depending on what kind of government you have, that if you're the king and you have a son, your son is automatically the king. Doesn't matter if he's a good guy or if he's a bad guy, he's just a king because he's the son of somebody else. This is kind of one of those things where we're like, should he really be a king just because his dad was a king? Doesn't mean he's going to be a good guy. But he took over Thebes, so now he controls Thebes again, but the people are all his slaves and the town was destroyed. And then he decided that he wanted to take over more. He wanted to be kind of like, well, not kind of like, he was going to be just like Persia. He was going to take over everybody. He had a very powerful army, and his army marched east to conquer more land. He built a huge empire over the next few years. Few, just a couple. He led the armies into Egypt, near the Nile River. He built a whole brand new city and named it after himself. He called it Alexandria. It just shows how kind of conceited he was, right? Alexander the Great, and now he has a city called Alexandria. He really liked himself, didn't he? Then he finally attacked who? Guess who? People who want to take over everything else. That's right, Persia. He attacked Persia. He gave Persia a taste of their own medicine, and he attacked them. And when he attacked them, he won, and he became the new king of Persia. And Persia actually respected him because he was able to beat them, so they bowed down to him. And now Persia was part of his great kingdom. But however, Alexander, before I say this part, I want to show you. I have a map right here. So here is, let me fix this a little bit. Here is Alexander's great empire. Okay, so over here is where Greece is, all in this area. This area, and he started taking over Greece, and then he moved east and started taking over everything, including Asia, including Egypt down here. He was able to take over all of this. So he had a lot of them that he took over. Okay, now, go back to your lesson. So after taking over all of that, his people, his soldiers were like, dude, we're tired. I want to go home. We've been traveling. We've been fighting for you. We've been all over, taking over a whole continent. We want to go home. We've been traveling for 8 years, walking for 8 years, fighting for 8 years. We want to go home. And so they finally decided to start heading home. But unfortunately, at the age of 33 years old, Alexander became very ill and he died. He conquered all of this land and he lost it all when he died. And his commanders who were helping him, so he was the main guy, then there were a commander underneath him that helped take care of his army. They started fighting over who was going to be the next king, because unfortunately he didn't have any sons. So now they were fighting over who would be the next king, and they couldn't decide. And everyone was like, I'm the king. No, I'm the king. No, I don't want to be the king. So they all couldn't figure out who the new king was. So they all started having wars within each other, and his whole empire fell apart because different people took over different parts. So his great empire that he conquered all went away. So all that work was for nothing because he ended up losing everything in the long run. But a lot of his great ideas that he did have, and a lot of the great ideas that the Greeks had, were still able to spread all over the world, which is like why we have democracy, because we're still able to have all of those great gifts that Greeks were able to give us. All right, now the story of the Gordian knot. I wonder, remember we tell you about legends and myths, and I wonder if this Gordian knot thing is a real thing. But apparently, hundreds and hundreds of years before Alexander the Great was even born, there was a king, and his name was Gordius. It was who? Gordius, yes. And Gordius, for whatever reason, decided to make a knot. So he got a string, and he tied it, and he tied it, and he tied it, and he tied it, and he made this knot that was it was impossible to take apart. And he declared that if there was ever anybody who was able to take apart the knot, that they would be the king of the world. The world would be their kingdom. So you had people from all over the world for hundreds of years coming and trying to untie this knot, and no one was able to do so successfully until Alexander the Great came, and he found the knot in the temple where it stood, and he looks at it and he's like, I'm gonna untie that knot. So what did he do? Did he go untie it? No. He grabs his sword, picks his sword up, and he smashes the knot, cuts it in half, it falls to the floor, it's no longer a knot, and he yells, I am the world's king, or the world is my kingdom. Everyone cheers, they're happy, because the Gordian knot is gone, and he untied it. Right? Isn't it kind of a weird story? It's one of those things that's a myth that I just don't know if it's really true or not. We'll see. Maybe it is. I mean, I don't know how we'll ever see. But they believe that, and it was called the Gordian knot. All right. So move on. Here is a part. This is the map that if you wanted to color, it says, what does the shaded area of the land stand for? Right here. It says, what does the shaded part stand for? Well, it stands for, here's my key, the Empire of Alexander the Great. So you can write that. The Empire of Alexander the Great. Write that in this line right here. And then you can color the parts of the continent which he took over. So if I get my marker, I can kind of show you. I'm going to color this part all over here, and then again down here. So I'm going to take a few seconds, have a highlighter, and I'm going to color in quickly just to give you a better idea of everything he was able to conquer. Not bad for 8 years and a 22, 30-year-old, right? By the time he died, he was my age, and he took over all of that. That's a lot. That was all his. Interesting, right? All right, let's go on. Lesson number 7, questions. Oop, those are the answers. All right, here we go. Number 1, who was a student of Aristotle? So it goes Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then Alexander the Great. Great job. Alexander the Great. Alexander's father was the king of Macedonia. After King Philip of Macedonia died, who took over? It was Alexander. Which city-state did not want Alexander as their king? It was Thebes. Yes, Thebes was like, nope, we don't want you. And because they didn't want him, what did Alexander the Great do to them? Unfortunately, he burned down the city, and then he made them all slaves. That was kind of sad. Well, it is sad. Not kind of. It is sad. Number 6, Alexander named a city after himself. What did he call it? He called it Alexandria. Great job. Alexandria. Getting my chair all mixed up. I'm getting too excited. Moving around too much. Number 7, there is a legend about Alexander the Great. It says that he cut the famous what? Well, the knot. He sliced it in half. Boom. Done. Number 8, the knot was called what? Yes, the Gordian knot. Great job. It was said if you could untie this knot, you would have the world as your kingdom. Yes, the world as your kingdom. And why did Alexander say the world was his kingdom? Because he was able to untie the knot. Untie the knot. Wouldn't that be cool that if you could untie a knot, you would have the whole world as your kingdom? Nice thought. And Alexander died at the age of 33. That's right. He was just a young 33. After he died, other rulers took over his empire. He lost everything, and it fell apart because he didn't have kids. Remember, the kids took over for their dad, and since he was so young, he didn't have a kid, then no one could take over for him. All right. After Darius died, who took over? So King Darius was the king of the Persians, and his son was King Xerxes. Great job. Number 14, the Persians had built up a very huge army. They decided to attack Athens. The first time they attacked them at a place called Thermopylae. Yes, Thermopylae. When they got to Thermopylae, they met how many Spartans? How many Spartans? 300. Great job. Were there more Persians or were there more Spartans? There were more Persians. And who won? That time it was the Persians, unfortunately. Remember, the Athenian people won the first time, but the Persians lost the second time. Or the Persians, sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Okay, the very first battle, the Athenian people won because they did a surprise attack and the Persians ran away. The second attack, the Battle of Thermopylae, was when the Spartans helped, but the Persians had way more people, and unfortunately the Persians were able to beat them. So number 17 was the Persians. Number 18, we call this battle the Battle of Thermopylae. Yes, Battle of Thermopylae. And number 19, who lived to the east of Greece and taken over land? It was the Persians. Yes, the Persians. Maybe she don't put Ionia. Ionia was the first place they tried to take over, but they didn't do the taking over. That was the Persians. The Persians were the bad guys. The Persians first started fighting in a city of Ionia. And who did Ionia ask to help them? They asked the Athenian people, and then the Athenian people asked the Spartans. It's not on your question, but it's good to know. And then who did the Athenians asked for Sparta for help. Good job, 22. And who did they send to ask Athens? That should be Sparta. Remember, that question's wrong. Number 23 should say, who did they send to ask Sparta? They asked Phidippides, that guy who unfortunately died. And in 24, in the meantime, Persians sent how many ships to Greece? They sent 600 ships. These ships landed in a place called Marathon, and that was the first battle. Battle of Thermopylae was the second battle. The Battle of Marathon was the first battle. And what was the king of Persia's name? It wasn't Xerxes, it was his dad, King Darius. Great job. After the Athens attacked the Persian soldiers by surprise, what happened? The Persians ran away crying. They were upset that they lost. Bummer. The Athenian people were so happy, they sent who to tell the rest of Athens? They sent Phidippides. And Phidippides' last words were, "We are victorious!" We are victorious. He was excited that they won, but then he died. So sad. All right. That was it for Alexander the Great. You can determine for yourself if you think he was great or if you think he just liked taking over things. On our next lesson, we're going to conclude Greece and learn about the Greek goddesses and gods.